in 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, we're back, everybody. We've done it. We've brought on a new guest. This is the Smart and Public podcast that discusses business, careers, and life through the eyes of public relations and communications expert. I'm Katie Boysen.
And I'm Katie Duffy.
And we've got a guest today. As I said, I'm really excited about this one. He not only covers a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but he's also just like a peach. I think everybody's going to love Roberto. Roberto, welcome to the pod.
I don't know if I've ever been called a peach, but I will take that. Thank you very much for having me. It's so exciting to be here.
I want you to kind of talk about your background because I always find it interesting how people get to the road of consulting and what that looks like. But let me just kind of lead you in a little bit to make sure that we don't miss any of the good bits. But I mean, you've been in a kind of leadership roles across Fannie Mae, which we'll talk to the Australians about what that actually is.
Yeah, we need to.
We all know what a Fannie is, right, in Australia. So
different company.
It wouldn't be this podcast if I didn't bring that up. So apologies to Fannie Mae Incorporated. You were a leader at HSBC, at Tesco, like all these great in-house roles. You also were a leader on the agency side, and then you've ended up in consulting. Like, talk to us how you got to this spot, and kind of what your career looked like along the way.
Yeah, cool. Well, so I've been doing communications for 20 years now, to date myself. But as you mentioned, I started, mostly my career has been in-house. And at the sort of in global roles and international roles, but also the US, Asia, Central Europe. So that's been like, I've always thought that it's nice to have lots of sauces with your French fries. And I've always liked to have lots of different experiences in my life. And so I've honestly organized my career that way as much as my personal life. So I worked in-house in those types of roles. I've worked for Edelman. I worked for Weber Shandwick, helping with both internal communications, external communications, government affairs. So just kind of like cutting my teeth in lots of different communications areas, which I also think is really important for us to do as professionals. And then I started my own consultancy about 2 years ago. I think it was like partially the pandemic was over. There was sort of the existential, what do I do next, to the, I've had my corporate roles and I've enjoyed them, but I also wanted more agency and I wanted to sort of be able to row my own canoe and see if I could take that as well. So that's kind of where I landed with starting my own consultancy, Munoz Communications. But, communications is so interesting because there's just so many different places to go play in and there's a fire run to it. And I've always taken that philosophy at work.
I love that. I feel like if there's a fire run to it is like just everybody's mantra moving forward. But
because they're all on fire.
Well, but I just feel like there's such an influx of consultants that we're seeing coming into the market now. Like, I don't know, Duffy, maybe you have something to weigh in from Australia's perspective too, but in the US, like we're seeing so many people going out and they're either like, fractional curious or they want to be consultants. Like, Roberto, like what are you seeing in the market? Why do you think now is the time what we're seeing kind of consultants come into the forefront?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors going on and I'd be interested in everybody having their opinion because I think that communications is changing, obviously, right? It's changing at all different levels, right? In terms of how people are consuming information, just based on consumers, on audiences, how we as communicators need to show up. So I think that's going on, but that's probably for a separate question. But if you're looking at like what's happening with the agency model, there's big agencies that have they're losing a lot of folks because they're having to tighten their budgets in order to be able to hit their numbers. You've got a lot of people that are in similar positions to me where they've gone so far in their career and they're saying like, hey, do I want to maybe try a different way to do that? I think the pandemic was obviously a massive accelerant there for so many different things. And then, there's with the agency model kind of contracting in a way, there's a lot of really senior people that are out in the market right now that have a lot of really great experience. And, they're charging a fraction of the price that a big agency model would charge. And the value equation for communicators, for people that are in-house looking for folks like us, it's there because you get the senior person at a much lower overhead and you get the quality of work. They're happy, you're happy. So I think that there's lots of different pieces moving around here, but it kind of feels like the moment is, to your point, it's happening. Like there's so many people that I know that have been in big roles in agencies or in-house that are now kind of floating in more of a market. And we're all trying to figure out together, how do we do this right and do this together?
Yeah. I think that there's also, like you mentioned, with layoffs happening in the market, there's a lot of people that are, and myself included, entering, because of the opportunity. Like when I got laid off from Salesforce, I was like, oh, maybe I'll try consulting, because the job market and the interview process was an absolute nightmare. And so I was like, oh, maybe I can find a better way to do this out on my own with the experience and the network that I have. So went out there by accident, but then stayed by choice because I
Yeah.
loved it, and so it was just a better fit. And so I just feel like there's a lot of people out there that are kind of trial by fire, and then, learning how to get through and find ways to create a new career for themselves.
I love that because I was the same. Like, I didn't set out to become a consultant.
Mm.
I was looking at the job market. The job market's tough, and there's
Mm.
tons of people trying to apply for the same roles. And, it's a really complicated, difficult process to go through. So I think I kind of was like, hey, maybe I'll try consultancy. And then you get your first client, and then you're like, wait, maybe I'll keep trying that. And then all of a sudden, there's like this precipice where you're like, maybe that's my career. And I
Totally.
think that started happening for me.
And for both of you, was the first client like network based? Was it quite organic? Like, I'm interested in that kind of, because I think once you get, as you say, you kind of do one, you go, oh, actually, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll try it. But what was that? And you don't have to say who it was, but kind of where did it come from, that first piece of business?
My first piece of business came from just putting myself out there on LinkedIn, like deciding that I was going to give it a shot, see what my network was going to feed to me. So I just put a
Mm.
post out on LinkedIn saying, like, here's what I'm going to cover. Here are the services that I'm interested in. Here's the kind of work that I want to do. Would love if anyone had any recommendations. And then literally my first client came through someone who, worked in a different part of Salesforce that had an opportunity come to them, and they couldn't do it because they were full time. And so they passed it to me. And that's how I got my
Mm.
first client.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what mine is that I couldn't figure out if I wanted to go back in house or not, and sometimes I have those existential questions where I still ask myself that. But
Yeah.
it was, and I think that I had one foot in, one foot out, which is an interesting conversation maybe to have later too, of like, like when we decide to go all in and what that
All
means or
in. Yeah.
not. Right.
Yeah.
But I was applying for roles, and there was a role that I turned down, but then I actually was like, I've been talking to consultants about how they sell things in, and they were like, well, don't just say you're not going to take the role. Say that you're not going to take the role, but I would love to do a fractional role for you in the interim to be able to support you while I
Huh.
continue to look for other roles. And they were like, well, we don't have anybody else in the pipeline. You're the person that we kind of wanted for the role.
Mhm.
But actually, that sounds pretty good. Maybe we'll do a 3 to 6 month sort of setup, and then maybe even help us find the person that would take the role, because I'd built that rapport, that trust, and that relationship. So, I mean, I don't know how often that happens, right? Because I've not, but it was still kind of like, but the lesson for me is like if you've got the chance and you've got the trust, like if you don't tell people what you're looking for or offer it up in a way that's advantageous to them, then you might miss the opportunity. And that for
Mhm.
me was a good lesson early, but also that was my first client.
It's the old school, like if you don't ask, you don't know, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
I think that whole, and to your point, you needed to have the trust. They'd already established that you were someone they wanted to work with, but just putting it out there as an option for them. And a lot of businesses need that sort of stopgap potentially when they're looking, especially if the person they want is not going to take the role. So yeah, that's really interesting. I always just think that's and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit at some point. I think a big barrier to like diving into the consulting piece is like thinking about how am I going to get my first piece of business? Like, what is that going to look like? And like, once you get that, I would imagine the confidence slowly starts to grow because you think, actually, yeah, I can do this. But I think for me, a large part of like when I got made redundant as well, I flirted with the idea of doing it. But I think I personally feel like imposter syndrome was kind of, I was like, I don't think people are going to hire me. Like, I don't know if I have
Mhm.
anything, like, am I senior enough? Like, all of those questions went through my head. Did both of you have those moments, and how did you kind of get through them?
First of all, I think it's crazy that you had imposter syndrome, but also I think every person that I've ever met has it. And every person that says that they do, I'm always like, that's crazy. You're the best. So I think that's a big piece of it, because one thing that PR people are not we don't love is selling ourselves. Like, we're not in front of the camera for a reason. If you can't do, teach, I think, a lot of the time in our
Yeah.
profession. And so with that, I think that was the biggest hurdle for me, was going out. And I mean, in some cases, you're speaking to a CCO at a Fortune 500 company and trying to sell in, here's why I am a benefit to your team as a consultant.
Yeah.
And that's really scary, because I still think, we talked about this with Cheryl a little bit. I still think that I am 20 years old. And at the beginning of my career, like, I forget that I have 20 years of experience and I'm not a baby anymore. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think as I practiced that, I got over that hurdle. But I think going out there and getting those first clients was I felt very vulnerable and very, very nervous about if the services I was offering were right for the market as well.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt it. I mean, I think that anybody that says they didn't is probably, blowing smoke at you. But I honestly I would feel more comfortable going to a vice president communications role in house than I did to try to start my own business.
Yeah,
That's so funny, because that's what I was going for when I was interviewing, before I was like, okay, consulting is it. Like, I was interviewing for like head of comms roles, yet how scary is it to pitch yourself to a peer,
Right. And you can kind of like, and I'm not saying this to slag off in house at all, but like you have like a structure there, right? You've got the paycheck, you've got the teams, you've got shared accountability, you've got the strategy, you've got the accounting team, so there's like a shared responsibility in a way of like everybody fails or succeeds.
Yeah, there's a confidence in that for sure.
There is a confidence, but then it's like, well, if I fail, I can't blame it that it was the company or it was the CEO or it was the bad boss. It was you. And I think that was probably the nugget of the nugget. If I really were to like lay down on a couch and tell you all about it, that's probably the moment of like, I'm exposing myself in a very vulnerable way, and it would be very obvious. Finger quotes, that it would be very obvious to folks that if I didn't succeed, that it was my fault.
100%. I think that the level PR people already have a huge level of accountability, because we're telling executives like what to say in public, and the company is held accountable for it. But adding a layer to that of like your deliverables and what you're driving for impact within a company when it's just you as a consultant is also very revealing on not only to what your potential business could look like and the referrals that you get, but also just, you have to look at yourself as a comms person and say, like, what am I actually going to deliver? What am I good at? What am I not good at? And then have the balls to say, like, here's what I'm going to structure and recommend to you, and here's what I can't provide for you. Like, it's very confronting.
Yeah. I did realize that I'm a pretty darn good problem solver I kind of knew that, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, but like when you're kind of confronted with, how do you build an LLC, or how do you, attack a tax vehicle? How do you build out, your accountancy? How do you find new clients, build new business? It was like, for me, it was like, once I started getting a few of those under my belt, it was like, I could figure this out. Where before it was kind of like each thing felt like it was like a YouTube tutorial day where I'd have to like try to figure all this stuff out. And I was like, maybe I don't want to go through that path. But it's almost like once I got enough going, and then to be honest, because to your earlier question is, once I started making money, imposter syndrome started going away. And I know that sounds obvious, but actually making sure your bank account's not just depleting, that there is confidence in that. But anyway, that's definitely something that I felt.
What do you like? I don't know how to ask this question in it. I'm just interested in at what point did you realize it was a legitimate source of income and could sustain? And everybody's circumstances are different, right? But I'm just talking, like, did you have a moment where you went, this is actually could be my job and my career, and it's working? Like, do you remember that moment?
I do. Mine was when I got my first retainer, because
Okay.
and this is why so many people say, when from a pricing perspective, that they want to go to retainers, because it gives you the sort of, you get 6 months, right? Okay, it's like, I've got 6 months until I need to not figure the next thing out, but at least you've got like a table stakes thing in place. Or by getting a retainer that was like a 6-month retainer, I just knew, okay, like I've got $60,000. Like I can at least work with that. It's when you get to the place of like, nobody's responding to my pipeline, I've got a client that might be rolling off, I don't really
Yeah.
know what I'm gonna do next. That's I think where like the sort of panic started to happen where but it's like once you get a few of those platelets in place, they do build on each other, and then you start to
Mhm.
realize there is a cycle of seasonality to stuff, and you just sort of calm yourself a little bit more and then go,
Yeah.
just keep doing the things that you know work. I don't know, Katie, if that does that resonate?
I kind of went balls to the wall, Roberto, on my
Okay, good.
approach. Like um I had the grace of the gift of time is the way Dovesy puts it in terms
Okay.
of having a severance
Or
package.
redundancy.
Oh yeah.
So I had a severance package where I knew I had like, all right, I've got 9 months to make this work. So I had a ticking clock.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the grace I gave myself to like try to figure it out. But to me, I knew that if I had in the back of my mind, like, oh, I can just always go and get a full-time job. I didn't want to have that in my head. So for me, I was like, this is the only option.
This is
This
it.
has to work.
Yeah, there is no
And
plan B.
so
I like that.
yeah, and so I kind of took it as like there is no other option, mostly because I just didn't want to go back into the,
Yeah.
the hiring cycle. It's like I don't want to have to make presentations. Jokes on me because that's what all proposals are, but
That's
still,
basically all we do now, right?
that's all I do now.
Like,
No, but I just kind of treated it as no other option. I think a big part of that though was personal brand and really leaning into like having vulnerability of figuring out what my own brand was and getting that out there. Like, I don't know, Roberto, like you have a pretty awesome following on LinkedIn. You've like built a newsletter. You've got all this kind of branding stuff that you've done around Munoz Comms. Like, how important would you say a personal brand is to all of this, to building pipeline?
I mean, I think it's like everything. I mean, like, and, it's, well, one, it's your network, and how strong it is and nurturing that and building it, which I think they're not exclusive, right? But then also building out your personal brand and being, you got to remind people, you said this early, definitely this like, you got to tell people, you got to remind people that you exist. You got to tell them what you do. And again, I think that's a really uncomfortable thing to be doing, but there's, if you're not showing what you do and telling people what you do and doing it in a way that builds authenticity, trust in your brand, then I think there's just a lot of people, to the point earlier, it's a crowded marketplace right now. How are you
yeah.
cutting through? How are you reaching people? And interestingly, like this is the thing, and I'd be interested to how you think about it. But like I first started with like, I've got to do this like lead gen program. And I've got to like, one of those people that emailed me through LinkedIn that's like, you want to increase your leads by 5 million? I was like, yes, and I tried a couple of those. And then I found that I was just like annoying by like, I did it like one, and it was like, that's not me. That's not how I operate. Plus, I think we only need depending on your model, you only need a few pieces of business to be successful, right? You only need a few people to say yes at a big enough value. And so I like looked at that and sort of abandoned it and then went more into just like, okay, I can actually use LinkedIn, not just to sort of show myself, but I also kind of learned how to do it for clients. And so it's become a big part of like a product that I offer in an interesting way where it's like, how do executives build their brand or how are companies doing it? So it's like every time that I was doing something, I realized that I was like learning about something about communications and marketing and branding, which could be virtuous circle for clients. But then also like, even if I decided to go back in-house, having a good brand is only going to help me get an in-house role. So I was like, it's win-win no matter how I look at it, and then just sort of double down on it because I didn't really know what else to do to get leads. And that was the most effective way.
What is the formula that you use for like your personal brand building?
And by
Does that
formula,
question
what do you mean? I don't
I was gonna say, this one wasn't on the sheet.
No, that's
Like,
okay. I don't mind.
like
Like,
what?
do you have a cadence? Like, do you say to yourself, I'm going
Yeah,
to,
sure.
at least do this much this week? Or, what's your kind of thought process around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it changes based on like how much client work I have, which is obvious, right? Because I always
Yeah.
prioritize the client work, which has got me in trouble a couple times because you're like prioritizing the client work and then you need to do all the other stuff that becomes like, okay, now you need to get a client, so you should have been doing it before. I do about 2 to 3 pieces of content on LinkedIn a week. I found that to be a really good driver for me, and not just content, but also really engaging with others on LinkedIn. So like, not just commenting like great job or way to get a promotion, but actually like adding value to every post to be able to like showcase, stuff that matters to me and that's relevant to me and my business.
Yep.
I do about a monthly newsletter, and I think that's again just trying to, without being too salesy, always trying to reinforce, what it is that I bring to the table or how I think about something. And I try to find I wrote about Prince the other day. I think it's, interesting sort of what's going on with that. But it's all about like storytelling, right? When I'm just trying to sort of elevate myself of, I understand narrative in a strategic way. And if you're looking for somebody that's not just gonna, so to say, send the press release, and I don't mean that to sound glib, but that, I would be the kind of person that you would want to bring in. So the newsletter's one, LinkedIn is a big thing. We're part of Mixing Board. All of us are. I found that to be really useful for, leads and networking, not just from like a confidence perspective, but also for a way for me to like build my network and find potential work that we could partner together on something. So I probably have like 2 to 3 meetings a day between people that are part of my network or an extended network, and just to try to keep up the cadence of always to be networking and meeting different folks on a regular basis. I don't know. Does that sound like a good formula? I think I've just put the equation together.
I think it sounds like a great formula. I think that it leads to something I wanted to ask both of you about, and it's kind of networks one thing, and then there's like community. And, obviously Mixing Board's created a great community, but like, do you get lonely, and how do you get that source of peer-to-peer community kind of comms? Because I think, and look, I think you can be lonely in-house too. It's not just consultants. Like I'm a one of one at the moment in-house. And so I don't have a comms person to bounce off necessarily during the day. My team is based in the US, but yeah, I'm interested. How do you foster that kind of sense of community, and how important is it, given most of the day you're sort of on your own, in your homes working?
I feel like community is everything when you're a consultant, especially like you said, it's lonely. And I truly think that comms is a team sport. And that was something when I first started with consulting, I was like, how am I going to be able to turn around and have my, who is going to be my Seamus helping me test headlines, like who's going to be that person for me now? And there's a million Slack channels out there. Like there's Comms Unity, there's Mixing Board, which Roberto and I are both a part of and big fans of, and how I met Roberto. But those Slack channels, like everyone is hungry for that community, whether they're a consultant or not. So I would like, that is the big piece for me, is that people want to share knowledge and people want to learn through your struggles and your challenges as well. And so I would just say that building that community is the most important thing, not only just to help you grow, but also helps you expand your opportunities as a consultant, to either come in and help out. Like even if there's like mat leave cover work and you've built a relationship and they're like, oh, come in and do a mat leave cover. Like there's a million ways that you can skin consultancy and get work, but it has to come through contributing to a community.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say, because in-house being the most senior comms person, I felt lonely a lot there too. And because, you're managing the team, you go to the team drinks, but you're not, you have to be the person that pays the check and does the thing, so I think that became almost, but also you're the only comms person trying to talk to a bunch of people that aren't communicators. And so interestingly, I felt that community was equally as important when I was in house as it has been when I've been, I mean, it sort of sounds like an obvious thing to say out loud when you say it, but so I felt like I joined a lot of groups when I was at the senior most in house too, was because I wanted to share ideas, have sort of like Chatham House rules, and be able to talk about stuff that I could with people that understood me. But similarly with Mixing Board and one of the tactical things that sounds tactical, but it's so important, is like, how do you set up your tax vehicle?
Totally.
How do like all this little stuff that I was spending hours and hours trying to figure out? Like that's like a blessing that just immediately, like somebody, because people inherently do want to help other people, right?
Yeah.
And if and actually, and it's reciprocal. And if you give something to them, they'll give something back. And I don't want to be that binary, but I found that honestly, if I didn't have that community to ask some of those sort of simple questions, to like client questions, to bouncing ideas, I think it'd be a much, much harder proposition to set up your own consultancy.
Yeah. I mean, I contribute probably like 2 or 3 hours a week of my time leaning into the community and to having network calls. I have monthly checkups, with check-ins with like a bunch of people that I've never even worked with, but have good ideas. And like, I respect kind of their perspectives on shit. And so just like making time for that is really important, and also gives you a mix. Like some of the people I have these check-ins with are fractional CMOs, and so I'm able to ask like, oh god, like I'm having a hard time like getting this narrative work across the line. Like, what have you seen from like a product perspective or a PMM perspective, or like any templates that would help with that? Like little things that like you wouldn't really think about, but the more you spread your wings out that way, the more you can kind of get creative with ideas for your clients too.
Yeah, and you got to plant seeds for the future would be the other thing I say. Like, I think when I first started it, you kind of don't see them starting to pay off. But now I'll see stuff that like, oh, I talked to that person 6 months ago, or I helped that person a year ago, or they told this other person about, I did a good job on this client work. I think you kind of, especially when you're starting off in the consultancy, you don't really see it as accelerate as quickly. But once you do, it starts to layer on top of each other, and there's a multiplier effect to it. Where that's been really eye opening to me. But it's like start with the network now.
Yeah.
Start investing now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that applies, I would say to anyone listening who's in-house agency, like either way, I have found that network piece so valuable to start, even if you're very early in your career, just start thinking about those connections, those communities you can join, building those networks. Because time and time again, those networks have paid off in ways. And to your point, Roberto, like it might be years down the line.
Yeah.
And then someone's like, hey, we worked together on that thing and I thought of you for this. And it's often blows my mind where the connections come from. And if you do one nice thing for someone, it pays off, down the line. So yeah, I just think PR people should not underestimate that value of that network. And you can start from day dot very early in your career.
Side note, we've got a bunch of questions from our audience that we've been able to gather for Roberto in this. One thing that kind of aligns to that I just wanted to kind of get out there is, if you're working solo, how do you test ideas out? And I think this is a really interesting one to kind of tackle, because there's a way that I have in mind, but I want to see what you say first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to LinkedIn again. LinkedIn's actually been a good, as long as you've got the right curated network. So it's not just like, part of the problem with LinkedIn is comms people. It's like comms people telling each other how great we are, or how we're talking about the problem and we love the marination of it. But the question is how does it play into the marketplace? And so I'm always looking for signals of that, and not just that we kind of all like commiserate together as comms professionals, but actually like, did that resonate? And I started like productizing certain things, and like almost like giving things away as an aperitif, and then sign up to my newsletter and you get a bit more. And then, if you really want to understand the full Monty, I will help to support you and we can have that conversation. But that, by like putting stuff out there as not just like theoretically talking about what I'm good at, but like very specifically being like, I've got a narrative product, or I've got a LinkedIn strategy product, and then starting to see who bites on that, and then how resonant it is, and then how much I could make that become part of my strategy. So actually, like, it was almost like it's like a Lady Gaga crowdsourcing moment here. But but you're kind of, there is the social media responsiveness does give you feedback if you're talking to the right audience. So I found that to be one important way that I do it.
I think thinking about the board of directors as kind of the people that I want to test things out with. So like Dovesy very much on my board of directors of like a trust tree, where I could, if I'm trying something out, I can flick it to her and be like, hi, is this terrible or is this all right? Or like, what do you think that this would resonate in X market? But then there's also people like Pitt Marlowe, who from like a CEO perspective that is in my trust tree, that I could reach out to and say like, hey, do you see legs to this concept or this pitch or something like that, just to get a different viewpoint on it? So even not just testing ideas out within the comms community, but think about when you're building your network, and like, if you have a solo career, like what angles can you tap into across different areas of business to be able to make sure you're not just like yelling into an echo chamber?
Yeah, I love the council. I mean, I think that, and I used to call it that at one point, but I had a group, but there's definitely a group of people that will always pick up the phone if I call that have different points of view, but will always give me
Yeah.
honest feedback, not
Mhm.
just sort of blow smoke at me. So I
Yeah.
think having those people that are going to like say, that's not a good idea, or you should change it this, or try harder on that. I think that's really important wherever you are in your career. And I've found a few of those people like stop me from making a decision that I thought was great sitting in my apartment, typing away, right?
Yeah. You know what else has been interesting is like having a husband that's an entrepreneur
Oh,
and like
that's interesting.
I'll just go downstairs and be like, Scott, what do you think about this? And he's like, you're no, absolutely not. Throw it in the trash. Like,
That's Scott's answer to most things when you come down and talk to him. I actually think, yeah, I think the key here is like the mix of the council or the board of directors. Like, don't just have comms people, because I think then you are a little bit in an echo chamber. And then the second piece, Roberto, that you referred to is like people that you know will tell you the truth and be
Hmm.
honest about it. I think if you can collect a group of people that meet those two needs, that is so valuable to have. And it takes time to build that, but most of us have that handful of people that, someone is that honest colleague and probably is in comms who will go, yeah, no, I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah.
And then, to your point, Boysen, is it a CEO, a sales leader, a marketer, like just someone with a bit of a different perspective, I think can be super helpful.
mhm. All right, I'm gonna go just start going. Let's just like rapid
Do a
fire.
rapid fire round.
Oh,
Except for we can take as long as we want to
Yeah.
answer.
that's okay. Let's slowly rapid fire.
Yeah, exactly. It's like me just pitching a baseball instead of shooting a
Okay,
gun.
good.
Right? Okay, so number one question that we got was, how do you work out what to charge?
Yeah, so pricing is an interesting one, and I think that I probably stumbled through it versus had the perfect answer from the beginning. And we actually were talking about this earlier. What's the model you take? And I first started with like hourly when I first started,
Mhm.
and I mentioned I moved more to retainer because I think it gives me the consistency. And I've also found that if you're hourly charging some clients for a long time, some months when it goes crazy, they all of a sudden go, wait, do we need that comm support? Or so
Mm.
I found that actually the fluctuation sometimes it works in my advantage, but it also could potentially harm in the future the opportunity to continue to have the client longer term because a
Mhm.
surprise might show up. So I typically do a retainer right now, and I don't take a retainer under $10,000. I'll be transparent on that, and I've learned to be able to do that as I've been able to take more clients. And some people are much further on that. They're like, I'd only take a $20,000 client, but that I think helps me to kind of make sure that I can pay my bills and to do things in the right way for my own side. But there's project-based fees that I look at a lot depending upon how surgical it is. And I've been doing a lot of strategy work where it's like narrative, audience personas, channel development, and then like handing that off. And so
Mhm.
I've been, doing that more of a 3 month engagement where it's like I kind of come in, I help to support it. I'm trying not to do too much execution work unless, there's a certain client where it does seem to work out for whatever reason, but just more of the strategy work where I can partner side to side with the CCO, or I can,
Yeah.
come into a project basis or have a retainer where I'm really working on strategy. So that's kind of I don't know what others have, but that's like, that's how I've approached it. It hasn't been a perfect straight line. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, that's true. I tend to look at a scope and like have and chat through with the prospective client or with my existing client, like here's what they're trying to achieve, build a program tailored to what will help them achieve that, and then give them an hourly kind of cap of like, here's how many hours I think this is going to take a month, and then here's my rate attached to that hour. And so that way at least that keeps from the creep happening.
Yeah.
So like if
Yeah.
you have a retainer, sometimes you feel like you're at their beck and call all of the time and it can overwhelm. And then with hourly, sometimes you're not getting to bill enough to your client to
Yeah.
like make
Yeah.
it sustainable. And so for me, I like to have like, here's the max a month. And
Yeah.
typically because of the scope outline that we do, it ends up being that max.
Yeah. One thing I do ask myself every time, and I agree with that, is I go, how much would this charge and be charged internally? And then I add 20% because you're not getting the healthcare. You're not, I mean, just think about it. You're
Yeah,
paying for your
right.
software, you're paying for your own costs.
Yeah.
So, think what's the market value and not backing down from that. And actually, like, that's just a good baseline versus like negotiating in your head yourself. I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, but I just want to say that that's a frame
No,
of
I think that's
mind
a
that I
really
show
good
up with
tip,
it.
is remembering that you don't have all that. Yeah, I think that's really good.
And also
People
like what
forget
makes you competitive against agencies too, So I think
that.
that, agencies tend to cost way more than a consultant because they've got a million people mouths they've got to feed.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it that way as well.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay, go do this again.
rapid fire. Okay. Oh, this is a longer question. When when you work with a company, are you just selling yourself as a CCO or also a full scope of services priced individually so that you can add on other resources to scale?
Yeah. I mean, so this is an interesting one for me because I kind of call it a deconstructed agency model because I
Hmm.
don't want to rebuild an agency model. That's not what I came out to do. I want the freedom,
Right.
the flexibility, the consultancy. But if I run into a problem, and I was saying this earlier, being a problem solver is definitely where your number one sort of skill set needs to be
Mhm.
developed. Is like, okay, can you do this? It's like, I know I can figure that out. And I know through the network that I have that I might not, I might be sort of too expensive as Roberto to show up to do some pitching in a very specific way. But what I do know is a freelancer who's a tech media specialist who charges sort of less than I do and might do an hourly rate where I could like white label them, bring them in, and they don't the service doesn't change. And actually they sort of getting me as a person who's worked in agency models and given managed accounts and clients, but I can like
Mhm.
actually, as opposed to like having this bench of people that you always have to tap into, I can like surgically bring them in based on the problem that we're having at the moment that we're having it, and
Yep.
help to like organize that. So I think that model is a really compelling one for clients. It really resonates, but also it works if you really think about it, because this month it might be this 6 months it might be a LinkedIn strategy. The next 6 months it might be a different focus that you need to pivot on, and you kind of
Yeah.
actually want to make sure you've got all the tools in your Swiss Army knife.
I think also being like reminding your client or your prospective client in that situation of like your value isn't just what you can do individually, but also your network that you're tapping into. So I think there's one good example that I have from my own experience of there is a design agency that I used to work with back when dinosaurs were still on the planet when I was at Jawbone. And they will sometimes tap me to come in if they're doing a launch where it's like a design company that bridges technology and business. And so they're like, we know we're not the experts at technology and business, but we've got somebody that we can bring
Mhm.
in to pitch this new business. And then they get to show me off as like, look at this expert. And so
Yeah.
I could do that the other way around. And so
Yeah.
it gives you that flexibility not only to like bring in different people and be super transparent with the client about your value add, but it also helps you breach into new industries that you otherwise wouldn't have the access to be entering.
The other model is that you're the second, like the fractional CCO role, which that's, I've found that that's more like you're embedded, you're involved,
Mm,
there could be a team in place, you might be managing an
yeah.
agency, you might be working in partnership with this chief marketing officer, and that for me has been more like working with the tools and the resources that you have in house versus kind of like the deconstructed agency model. So I'm
Yeah.
doing kind of both, and it's very dependent upon the need of the client.
I also think the CCO role, the fractional CCO, you should think about taking that on depending on what your goals are. So if you only want one client as a
Right.
consultant, that's kind of the angle that you're going to take. Like you can't really be a fractional CCO for multiple clients because there's just too much involved. And so that to me, like I've never really leaned into that idea because to me that feels like I'm being employed again and I only have one iron in the fire. Where I like to be mixing across different clients and thinking about, different problems that way.
Can I ask a question? Why would a company hire a fractional CCO versus appointing an in-house CCO?
Budget is one. So,
Okay.
like, think about as a
Yeah.
fractional CCO, if you are a Series B or C company and
Okay.
it's time to start thinking about comms, would you rather hire somebody at fractional price and pay them, like $400 an hour, and don't have to pay for their medical, don't have to pay their bonuses,
Right.
don't have to like buy them a laptop, all that stuff. And then only pay them when you use them. So you bill them hourly or whatever, versus going into the market, trying to find somebody to come on full time, going through a 3-month onboarding process, and then having to pay them like over 200K plus all this stuff a year,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there's other things like even like mat leave and things too, right? There might be
Oh,
that you had
God.
somebody
Yeah.
leave for a period. It's going to take longer to
Yeah.
go to
Okay.
market to get the person too. So there's a number of different applications, but I think the one that you said, Katie, is the sort of the primary one that I've seen people looking for. I do think also like explaining fractional and chief communications officer can be really problematic because a lot of people don't know what
Yeah.
comms does and they don't understand what fractional is. So
Yeah.
I think there might be a rebranding moment here to think about.
I actually think it's funny you say that, and this maybe leads to just a broader point that as we were talking, I've been thinking about. I think the word fractional is starting to be used in Australia, but it is not in the lexicon. Like it is not something you would hear a lot. And we wouldn't necessarily, we would say like I'm hiring a contractor or I'm hiring, and so I think that's been an interesting learning for me is actually Boysen said that word to me first. And I had not really heard it. This was kind of, at the very beginnings of our podcast. And so one, I think that's interesting. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot is like Australia, I think, is a little bit behind in terms of this tipping point of like people going into consulting. We obviously do have people doing consulting down here, but I do not think it's at the scale that it is. And this is all talking from a comms perspective, that it is in the US. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, but I think predominantly it's like we're a much smaller market. And so the war for talent is very high. So if there is jobs going, there's only a handful of people that are kind of, in that pool. And so I think there's probably less people going out on their own because there's probably less business to go get. There's less of a startup VC community as well. It's there, but it's not as big. And it's funny, like when you were saying, if I need to go do some specific pitching and I can just go get like a tech media specialist and kind of, charge an hourly rate. And I was like, I don't know if we would even, like they're all in agency because there's just not that many, from a talent pool perspective. So I just think it's really interesting. And I welcome feedback from our audience on, what they're seeing in the Australian market. But that's just my perspective. And Australia tends to be a little bit like, we might be 12 months from now. I'll be like, guys, we're there now. That's what's happening. So wait and see. But I just think that's an interesting nuance. And I wonder what it's like in other parts of the world as well. And I think, labor laws and things like that come into it, where Australia has some really interesting kind of labor laws around what you can and can't do from a work perspective. So maybe that's impacted as well.
I think to that point though, like if you are in a market where consulting isn't necessarily blowing up, or you're not seeing like those opportunities very clearly, think about like how you productize or like niche down into a service that you want to offer and just really specialize in that. Maybe you don't love doing it, but there's a huge need in the market for it.
Yeah.
Like you could reverse engineer it that way if you really, really wanted to go that route.
Yeah.
I actually think it should be taking off. Like I feel like there is an opportunity here for it. I think we'll start to see it.
I think your point around VCs and tech, though, that's actually an interesting one because I found that like it's, you don't get fired for hiring Edelman, right? Or web, like, it's a safer, if you're a bigger organization and, they've got more of the competencies and capabilities and like, you can go talk to your CEO that you're going to meet Richard Edelman and talk about the trust barometer. I just feel like, but like so I just mean that like there's a certain place for there's a broad place for agencies, but I think like consultants, like, it might be the nimbler, the sort of a bit more progressive CCO. It might be that, they've got a big growth, big change program. So as you're pitching where you can add value is making sure you're fishing in the right waters versus just like beating your head up against the wall, because some of these, I found it can be more complicated to find certain types of clients in certain types of industries. And maybe that trickles down to kind of where Australia is in terms of how many consultants are in that, to your point around how many VCs and tech companies there are, because I found more opportunity there.
I also find that high growth startups that the first hire that they do in that umbrella is typically a head of marketing, right?
Right.
And so expanding your network into those marketers and figuring out what that world looks like in the startup world, you could very much just come in and get their comms program off the ground in partnership with that marketer. So I just think that there's opportunities that way as well,
Yeah.
rather than just saying like, hey, who's looking for a communications
Yeah,
role,
that's
you
a
know?
that's a great idea. I'm writing that down, by the way.
Yeah.
I think for the Australians listening, I think there's also probably an opportunity for some of these high growth companies, probably tech as an example, who want to enter the market and they're not ready to hire an in-house comms person in Australia, but they might be ready to have someone on the ground who can do some initial comms work. And so I think that's probably where, like when I was in my redundancy period, a couple of like old colleagues had moved to sort of fast high growth companies that were trying to start sort of APAC or ANZ and had approached me about that. And so that felt like the sweet spot here is like they're entering the market, they're a US company or, you know, a European company. They don't kind of need someone in-house yet, but they want to do some stuff to prime the market and get the sales team, you know, in a good position.
I also think to the finding clients angle within that, like if you're starting out as a consultant, I would say very much familiarize yourself with the venture capitalist firms that are in your market.
Mhm.
You know, like start to build relationships. Typically, there's a head of marketing within that VC. You know, like start to figure out who those head of comms or head of marketing in the VC world are. And so making sure you're thinking a bit differently rather than just like pitching into companies, like where does the market's fingers spread? You know, think
Yeah.
about it that way.
And the great thing, like I'm working with a private equity firm. The great thing about that too is that your pipeline starts to come to you because they've got their portfolio companies that they're working with. And if they need a comms professional to jump in to support in some of those places, then actually like we know a comms person that we work with
Yeah.
for our, you know, so actually it kind of like as a, you're kind of, you found a bit of a ecosystem to play in, which I
Yeah.
found really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good tip.
All right, I'm going back to rapid fire.
Sure. We lost the plot.
We've literally been through 3. Okay. Number 4. That we kind of covered this, but let me just know, Roberto, if there's something else that you want to add on to this.
Sure.
How do you map out your year, like prospective outreach to brands you admire or build on current relationships? Like, how do you pitch yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you said VCs. You know, that's VC. That's been like I've been finding places. So like I'm obviously we're all kind of news junkies, right? So I'm like trying to see like through the moment of inflection that we're going through at a macro level, like where are things going to start to net out? Because there's a fire run to it from a comms perspective. Point is any change that's happening in a market is going to need, or in an industry is going to need comms support. And so a lot of my effort is like, okay, M&As are going back up again in the US. Okay. Maybe I go out to the big 3 and sort of, you know, mention, you know, and I've done this, reach out to them and say, hey, I've done a lot of M&A work. I know that you guys are growing. Here's some about me. And actually just kind of keeping in mind and up to, so it's finding where the moments of inflection are happening in different organizations or where there's growth opportunities by certain industries and really kind of trying to target and build those relationships. I think we've covered the rest of it, but like that was one point that I was going to add is like really kind of finding those moments of inflections and figuring out where your skills match the inflection point that those industries are going through.
Yeah, matching skills to inflection points. I also think just like thinking outside the box in terms of like, what does a company actually need support with? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've harped on this before, but going through LinkedIn and looking for contract roles of parental leave cover, like literally, if you can get your foot in the door with a huge company or a small company, like once you're in, they'll love you. You just need to show your value and get in. It doesn't need to look like a traditional consulting role, you know? So just thinking a little outside the box there as well. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I like the language framing of this one, so I'm just going to read it. How do you even begin to get started? Would you recommend starting as a side hustle and building from there? Like, whoever wrote that is a legend. I love it.
Someone's thinking about it, put it that way. They're like, I need to do this, but I don't know where to start.
I think if you ask anybody that question, they'd have a different answer to it. I think we
Yeah.
both gave one on this call. It's like
Mhm.
mine was like it fell into it, and yours was double down on it, and mine was I might go back in house. And I guess if I told my younger self 2 years ago, my younger self, what I would do,
Baby.
I would have doubled down on it sooner.
Mhm.
Right. But I think I needed the confidence. It's easier to say in 2020 hindsight and all that. But I think I probably wasted a lot of time being in and out and like, okay, I'll figure out how to build my own website or, like just things that I like was like money conscious, but also kind of not outsourcing and not like going, okay, if you're really going to do this, what's your budget? What's your plan? How do you do it? What are you going to do to be intentional about it? I
Yeah.
probably wasted like 6 to 8 months just kind of waffling. But to be honest, I'm not sure that I could have done it without the waffling. So I don't beat myself up too hard about it.
Don't. I think you've done okay.
No, but I'm just saying, but you.
But I think it's a good tip. Is like, I think it's the confidence piece, right? Like Boysen, you went balls to the wall, which is very Boysen. But like, probably for people who are trying to think about this is like, I think if you're going to try it, give it a good crack and go for it, back yourself. And then, if it doesn't work, you can always get back into that job hunt.
I do recognize like having the severance, like that is such a privilege to be able to like have that grace to get out there. Like there are people that I've talked to that are interested in consulting that like haven't left their job yet, but they've got kids and their husband is also self-employed. And like, there's lots of risks and stuff involved, particularly in the US where you have to pay for your own healthcare and it's not cheap. And then all of the services that go into that, like, do you get muck rack and all that kind of stuff? Like as a PR person, do you know what muck rack is? See, yeah, muck rack is like, a database for journalists, like
dashboards and reporting and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's good. It's not cheap, but it's good.
Yeah.
It's not cheap when you're paying for it by yourself, right? But I think that's because I had my bonus before I left Fannie Mae, so I was in a similar position that I was like able to kind of spend the time thinking about it, not have my husband like breathing down my neck, being like, "Hey, what?" So actually. It's the individual circumstances and your risk profile, and that does really play an important factor.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because if you're the breadwinner, if you're holding up a family, if you've got a mortgage, all of that sort of stuff, it's less about confidence and more about like, how do we make this work for our family, for our home or whatever. So you're right. It's everybody's going to be different in how they kind of go about it.
We've got one more question on the rapid fire. Do we have time? Is everyone all right on time?
I'm good. I don't know if you're talking to your listeners or me. I'm good. I hope everybody's still here.
Hey, listeners, are you guys all right? Let's just see how awkward I can make this. Okay. The last question is, how are you using AI?
Ooh.
I have a post-it note on my desk that said, "Can AI do this better?" And I honestly, I start by default with ChatGPT, and I wasn't for a long time. And I know that this it feels like cheating, but would you blame a contractor for using Hammer? I don't think you would, right? And I started thinking about it now, where ChatGPT is open at all times, at all moments on my desktop, and I am constantly using it, not to just cut and paste, copy it over, but it's a great thought partner. It's an incredible co-pilot. And even just writing, rewrite this sentence in 10 different ways. Like if I get stuck on something, or I need a better conclusion to this, give me some options and thought starters. Or, even today I was I'm meeting with a salesperson on Monday. I'm meeting with a salesperson. I'm working with a private equity firm. Give me 5 questions that I want to ask them about how we do a market. It's just like things that of course I could come up with. But why spend all that time and energy when you can get there 90% of the way? So for me, it's like bread and butter.
We just talked about this. I feel like we should have Chris G to answer this question for us. He's in Mixing Board. He's like the AI PR guru. Shout out, Chris. But I think, there's a bunch of other things when you're thinking about AI too, and not just like Chat GPT in terms of helping you think of outlines for things, but there's also what is the one that Chris talked about, Roberto? I'll have to look it up, of you can give an outline of a presentation and it'll build the deck for you.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you just put the
absolutely.
outline.
I don't remember what it was.
You can summarize reports. If you want to get the key data points out of a massive report to then use that as part of your storytelling. You can literally put the report in and be like, tell me the 3 main things about defense spending. You know, if I use my example, defense spending in Australia, right? And it's like, I don't necessarily need to read that whole report. I'm just trying to get some little like nuggets that I can like, I just think to your point about time, Roberto, like this is not about replacing us as storytellers and our ability to do what we need to do and our strategy and all of those things. These are tools to help us be more efficient and like pick the ones that make sense for you in your job. But like we should not be using them because we're afraid that like it's cheating. Like it isn't. You know,
and to your point, Boysen, because I totally agree with you. It's like I've seen some demonstrations of tools that are AI tool. I mean, obviously, ChatGPT is the obvious one to go to, but like doing audience mapping, doing consumer sentiment reporting, like some of the things that are going that are emerging that are going to enter our spot. And again, Christy is a better person to talk to about this. But you look at it and you're like, wow, I would have spent a whole week doing that, and that just did it in 30 minutes. And you're like, you know, so
we had Corey on, who's leading Boysen now, Corey DeBrow on the podcast.
Okay.
And some of the stuff that Boysen's doing around kind of predicting sentiment and stuff that's going to happen in the world with AI, like, and then being able to use that with clients, like, and obviously he is much more articulate about it than me, but I just thought that was really interesting. And I think for agencies that have the weight and the volume and the budget to go and invest to create some of these tools, it's super exciting. I think it's really interesting.
Well, especially if you're working in your consultancy with founders and CEOs, like they're going to want data, even if you're like, oh, it's super hard to measure, you know, like they want data. That's how they live and breathe, you know? And so using AI to figure out what data looks like, and also, you know, being able to come with some type of number around what you're working on and how it's successful is, you know, going to be a game changer in your own positioning.
Absolutely.
Devasie, is there any other questions? Are there anything?
No, I think we're up to the best question. We're up to the one that really matters, which is go ahead. Sorry, no, I won't ask it.
I was only half listening. I was going to ask one more question.
Okay, go one more question, and then I'll ask the fun one.
Yeah, you ask the good one. Just really quickly, thinking about AI, like what is, because I think this will be helpful for people that are listening that are also consultants, like what is your dream tech stack for a consultant? Like what tools do you use? I know we talked about Muck Rack. I know we talked about ChatGPT. Is there anything else out there that people should be?
I I actually wrote this because I know you asked the question. I was like, I don't really use that much. And then I wrote it down. I was like, oh my gosh, I use a ton. But you know, so I use Canva religiously. And I think just it's so easy to create a quick graphic. And I use it for clients now because I've gotten pretty good at it too. And it's easy for growth stage. Anyway, so there's that. I use Otter AI to record conversations. Obviously, I've got a Zoom, you know, membership, right? Calendly is a big one, especially when you get to consultancy, because it's basically you can send out your calendar and people can pick times that work for you and you can block it out and move it on different time zones. That's actually been a huge time saver when you do your own admin. And then Google Docs, I never really used because I was always using like a Microsoft suite of products when I was in house, but like I use Google Docs like religiously just in order to how I send things back and forth. But then also you got your own tech stack for your clients, which is a whole different thing. Like I use Slack all the time. I use Notion all the time. We've got a Muck Rack account with one of my clients. So there's kind of like my tech stack, which makes Roberto be organized and be able to be a consultant on his own, and QuickBooks too, by the way. But then there's also ones that I have to plug into. Sorry, that one, the whole finance piece. And then there's ones you got to plug into that sort of your clients have, and right. So you're kind of like toggling between them. But that's my tech stack. I don't know if it's my dream one, but it's what I got.
I don't think there is a dream tech stack. My dream tech stack is somebody doing it all for me. That's my
exactly
dream tech stack. No, I think Slack
I use Beehive too for newsletter. Beehive and ConvertKit is a really good one I've heard, but I just never moved it over. But just so you know,
Beehive
it's
is really popular. I know a lot of people that use Beacons as well. I find Beehive to be pretty intuitive.
It's pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
Nice.
No, that's good. That's a good one. Okay, you're up.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes, sorry.
Roberto, you may not have one, but this is the Smart and Public podcast, but we are notoriously dumb in private, Boysen and I. And it's not so private anymore because we talk about it a lot on the pod. But I do want to know, are you dumb in private, or do you have a dumb in private for us?
Well, yes and yes. But so I was listening to your podcast before and heard the question. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm not. I thought of one. It happened this past weekend. I went on a vacation to a black tie event gala, and everybody, it was like a red dress, red, bow tie, black tie. You kind of had to do the planning. My dog doesn't like when I leave, and I don't like leaving my dog. And I walked back in with my luggage, and I left all of my clothing. And I'm a 6'4", 250-pound person. So finding clothing when I got to Indianapolis, about 3 hours away, was very difficult. So let's just say that I was the most underdressed person at the gala dinner, and that I had forgotten all my luggage and everything that I should be wearing. And of course, being a PR person, of course, I had to tell everybody the story over and over and over again because I was so embarrassed by it. Yeah. But I was wearing a blazer and no red. Let's just put it that way. So that was I went traveling and I forgot my luggage last weekend.
But also, like, what are the odds that you're traveling to like a very specific thing that you need a very specific outfit? Like, it's not like you could have just gone, and got like a shirt from wherever, or yeah.
I tried, and so that was my recent dubbing.
But when did you realize you didn't have the luggage?
Well, much later, and this is like also the troubling part, and because like I was going to bed and I was like, what am I gonna? Oh, I'll just go brush my teeth. And so anyway, have you seen Adam Sandler at the Oscars where he wore like the hoodie and like those big luxury? Yeah. I basically looked like that for the first half of the weekend because I had absolutely no clothing as well. But I realized that night, and then I just looked like I was not prepared for the weekend.
Not ready. Yeah. Oh, that's a great one. See, you can always find one. I feel like with common people, you can always find one.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
That's right. Yeah.
I've got one for this week as well, just to buffer Roberto. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been like on this workout kick. I've started to do Orange Theory, and it's exhausting for me. Devassee's already laughing.
I'm already laughing, but that's okay. Only because I know what Orange Theory is like, so I'm just imagining it.
We've also been to a Barry's boot camp class together, which was also just comedy in itself. But for anybody that doesn't know me, like, sure, I was athletic. I played soccer in college. Like, I used to have hand-eye coordination. I'm in my 40s now. That is long gone. And so I feel like now I forget, and I go to these Orange Theory classes and I'm instantly competing with everybody that is next to me and around me, which also means that I'm losing to everyone around me because I am no longer as fit as I used to be. So I absolutely blasted myself in this Orange Theory, like to the point where I ended on the treadmill. For all of you that don't know, it's treadmill, rower, and weights, and you do 20 minutes of each, and they've got like instruction. So I started with rower, then went to weights, and then ended on treadmill, blasted myself, ran as fast as I could on the treadmill. Like it was saying that I was 100% of my heart rate, like on the little thermometer thingy. And I get off the treadmill and I'm walking out, and I'm so tired, like I can barely move my legs in front of, like, one in front of the other. And I kicked the treadmill with my shin so hard it exploded open. So I exploded open my shin on the treadmill, and then had a goose egg. And then that night I went to bed, and some way that I had hit like my ligament or something in my shin, my foot like exploded and swelled up overnight. And now I haven't been able to work out for a week.
This is the classic, I don't know if you remember I started playing netball again, and it was just a disaster, and I ended up tearing my calf muscle and couldn't exercise for like 6 weeks. And the lesson is we're too old for this shit. Too old.
This sounds like 40s problems, doesn't it? Like we're all
like we're too old. We think we're 25, but we're not. You cannot.
But I just started doing that. It's just mat Pilates from now on.
Like yoga. Like we're at that stage. It's like
dog walking and hiking. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Roberto. Oh, that's a good one, Boysen. Like, no more Orange Theory for you.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna try to go Saturday, so just stay tuned, everybody. If I do this next week from a hospital bed, you know why.
Yeah.
Roberto, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. I think that people are going to learn a lot from this session. And just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It was fun. I was like when I hang out with you all more often.
Likewise.
No, we'll have to. Yeah, we should just next time we'll have a wine and we'll
Yeah,
just go down.
exactly.
I know. Okay, so for all of you that have ideas for topics or guests or anything like that, please just email us at hello@smartandpublicpod, or you can reach us on Instagram and TikTok at smartandpublicpod as well. Thank you, everyone, for having a listen, and let us know with thoughts or comments or feedback, and we'll talk to you next week. Okay,
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.